You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 10th of March 2025 on Monocle Radio.
Hello and a warm welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting to you live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Emma Nelson, and coming up on today's programme,
we have to look after ourselves. And we have to look out for each other. We need to pull together.
But can Mark Carney be all things to all people? We'll examine the stacked in tray of Canada's new Prime Minister. Also ahead, Poland's government takes a new direction in defence. We'll ask if the country's heading towards being placed on a war footing. We'll hear about a meeting between Japan and the UK foreign ministers and finance ministers and explore where they can help each other. Plus, Fernando Augusto Pacheco is here with a Eurovision update. Over to you, Faye.
Hello, Emma. Today we discuss all the songs that you need to reach out and find out a bit more of this year's event, and they even have a new Eurovision stamp.
So exciting. That's all coming up right here on The Briefing with me, Emma Nelson. Canada's new Prime Minister-designate, Mark Carney, has to play many parts straight away. He must take on Donald Trump as a deal-maker. He must galvanise his Liberal Party for an election at home, step up as an ally of Ukraine and re-establish Canada as a world force. So how will Mr Carney, a man no stranger to dealing with crises such as keeping the UK afloat in the aftermath of Brexit, keep all the balls in the air and win? Well, Thomas Lewis is our Toronto bureau chief, and I'm delighted to say he joins me now. Very good morning to you, Thomas.
Good morning to you, Emma.
So it's a little gone 8 a.m. where you are. Canada's waking up to a new Prime Minister designate. How does it feel?
Well, I think, it'll feel the sort of how big his win was in the party, I think, will be quite a surprise to lots of people. There was a quite a big sense, Emma, throughout this leadership election campaign that was, of course, brought about by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's announcement of his resignation back in January, that he was the person that people seem to trust most, particularly in this time of instability and uncertainty with the Trump administration and Canada's biggest trading partner, the US, to the south. But I think the scale of Mark Carney's win, I think almost 86% of those people who voted in the Liberal Party for a new leader voted for him. And I think, they will feel that that does make a very clear signal of the kind of party the Liberal Party is now going to be, now that the Trudeau era is over, and how it intends to face these quite profound challenges that are ahead of the country, Emma.
Well, we'll come to this enormous shopping list that he's got to embark upon in a moment, but let's just talk about this changeover of eras and this rather strange, but dare I say it, endearing staging of the handover with Trudeau and Carney's daughters taking to the stage first. And then it very much became a generational event with Canada reaching back to previous prime ministers as well.
Yes, absolutely. As you say, it was Justin Trudeau's daughter, Ella Grace, who introduced him, and he was quite moved by the introduction she gave him. He had a handkerchief and sort of dabbed his eyes with tears before he gave his farewell address to the party he's led for a decade or more. And then, as you say, it was Mark Carney's daughter who introduced him. But yes, I think the major moment of the whole event, Emma, was Jean Chrétien, who is now 91 years old. He's a former Canadian Prime Minister. And he gave a very long speech that really was very effective and very blunt at times in his response to how President Trump in the US has spoken about Canada's Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, but also how he treated Ukraine's President, Volodymyr Zelensky, in the Oval Office. And that got a very big cheer, this support by him. He's also referencing history and the difficult times he had as Prime Minister, trying to put a bit of a context into this moment of uncertainty with the US, perhaps to try and steady the nerves a little bit among the country at large, but also party members, that times might feel unprecedented at the time, but actually these times do come and go, and it's how you deal with them that's important. So yes, he really did make a big impression to lots of those of us watching, Emma, last night.
I think we might have a clip of Jean Chrétien. Let's have a listen to it.
My mother taught us good manners. She would have been ashamed of me if I had treated anyone the way that the president treated my prime minister and the president in Ukraine in the last few weeks.
The difficult task that Mark Carney now faces is, as we mentioned a moment ago, he has to galvanise his party. He has to bring Canada together internationally and domestically. He has a problem south of the border in the shape of Donald Trump. And he also has a problem insofar as Canada for a long time has seen as being very much a country which is punching below its weight. Is Mark Carney the man for this? I mean, I'm not entirely sure that there is a human being on earth who can be all things to all people. But there was a discussion a couple of days ago that's saying that the way that the world is going, politicians aren't the ones who might be the best placed to do this kind of job. The world needs more CEOs and people like Carney, who, as former governor of the Bank of England and of Canada, knows how to navigate tricky paths while playing with business, with international delegates and with politicians.
Absolutely. And I think you've outlined it very well there, Emma. And I think, that is definitely an array of skills that Mark Carney has tried to make very clear and explicit in his campaign for the Liberal leadership, but also to a country that might not feel as though they know him that well. I think he has obviously leaned into this idea of being an outsider, that he isn't part of a government formally that has become very unpopular over the past few years, although the mood appears to be changing towards the Liberal Party now in the wake of these economic threats by the US. But certainly, he, I think, is trying to portray himself as someone who is an outside eye with lots of experience of a close proximity to various governments, obviously both as former governor of the Bank of Canada during the global financial crisis, and also, as you mentioned in your introduction, as governor of the Bank of England during Brexit. And I think when you're looking at the opinion polls and what Canadians seem to want from a prime minister at the moment is someone who knows how to steer the ship, both in terms of standing up to the US president, but also in charting a new path forward for the country, if indeed this is going to be, as has been described in some quarters, as a generational shift in how Canada's economy operates and the kind of country Canada wants to be. He obviously, just briefly, Emma, he isn't a politician. He has never had elected office before. There is some commentary that, his opponent, the leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, the head of the Conservative Party, he is a lifelong politician. So when it comes to elections and running campaigns, he might be an advantage there, even if he doesn't have the skill set of the real world or of private business that Mark Carney has. So this election that seemed like a foregone conclusion only a few weeks ago now is certainly going to get much, much closer when the time comes that Mark Carney decides to call it, Emma.
Indeed, it's a bittersweet moment for the outgoing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, given the fact that he stepped down a few weeks ago because of his level of unpopularity, both personal but also the fact that his Liberal Party were absolutely in the doldrums heading towards an election year. Donald Trump brought the country together and gave Trudeau a final blaze of glory, and he now hands over the Liberal Party to Carney in a very, very robust state in terms of popularity. I mean, what does Carney now need to do?
Well, he has got lots of things on his side. I think both from the party, we've seen, if you want a signal of how the mood inside the party is changing, for example, lots of sitting Liberal MPs who'd announced previously that they weren't going to stand in the election whenever that came this year, are now reversing those decisions and are declaring that they will now stand, sensing a change in the mood in the country. It was one of the funnier parts of Jean Chrétien, the former Prime Minister's speech last night, Emma, was to say thank you in a joking manner to President Trump for bringing this sense of unity to Canada, to the Liberal Party, but to the country more broadly, just given how profoundly so many Canadians feel towards the president and his manoeuvres against the economy. So it was really hard to imagine that the political landscape would change so dramatically in such a short amount of time. But we are getting a sense, Emma, that Mark Carney is looking likely to call an election pretty quickly, presumably to try and capitalise on this shifting mood and his high standing personally in opinion polls at the moment too. So it's going to be a busy couple of weeks, it seems, in Canadian politics at home, but both, of course, with the relationship with the US as well, Emma.
Thomas Lewis in Toronto, thank you so much for joining us on the line. The time here in London is 10 minutes past midday. You're listening to The Briefing with me, Emma Nelson. Let's have a summary of the day's other news headlines. Here's Laura Kramer.
Thanks, Emma. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky is in Saudi Arabia for talks with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. His visit comes ahead of key U.S.-Ukraine meetings in Riyadh tomorrow. Meanwhile, the Kremlin says Russia and the U.S. are in early stages of restoring ties. Malaysia has warned against travel to southern Thailand after attacks killed 5 people and injured 13. Suspected insurgents carried out bombings and shootings in the region, where separatist conflict has killed more than 7,000 people since last year. And MIPIM, the world's largest property fair, starts tomorrow in Cannes. Organizers say the industry is expecting a few fresh starts this year, with interest rates in many countries heading in a positive direction. You can read more in the Monocle Minute or tune in to Monocle Radio throughout this week for more. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Emma.
Thank you very much indeed, Laura. Now, how many of Poland's young men have begun to wonder when the call to conscription will come? The country's Prime Minister has given a speech in which he announced a profound shift in defence policy. On the wish list, doubling in size of the army, created by compulsory training for every adult man, plus closer ties to France and the so-called nuclear umbrella. Well, to go through what might lie ahead for Poland, I'm joined in the studio by Monocle's contributing editor and host of the Foreign Desk, Andrew Muller, and from Warsaw by Mateusz Mazzini, who's writer-at-large at Gazeta Wyborcza and a lecturer in journalism at Collegium Civitas in Warsaw. Good afternoon to you both.
Good afternoon.
Mateusz, let's begin with you. I mentioned there the idea of young men wondering when the call to conscription will become, but this is not really conscription. It is training that they are being told that they have to take part in. Nonetheless, this is a big shift for Poland, isn't it?
It is a major shift, especially from the point of view of public perception and public opinion. Conscription, as in compulsory military service, ended in Poland in 2008. And obviously there was a substantially different geopolitical environment. And we never thought that we would probably have to come back to sort of compulsory training for most adult males. We're yet to find out details about what Prime Minister Tusk proposed in front of the parliament on Friday, because initially in his speech he mentioned that this will be a program so every adult male in Poland is ready to fight should there be a need to do so. But now we're learning that it probably will not be compulsory. There will be different ways of undertaking that training. There will be incentives, probably in form of some financial compensations for attending it. It might take a few weeks, it might take months, you might take days off work to complete that. But I think it sends, most importantly, a very political message, a very important political message that these are pre-war times. This is not business as usual in politics. And Poland, being a country on the eastern flank of NATO, having a very painful history of Russian invasions in the last century and even before, is well aware of the danger in the east and will get ready. And I'll probably say that the question no longer seems to be whether that's if or when. The question is, when the time comes, will we be ready to face the danger?
This is clearly, Andrew, an agonising decision and choices that are being made by the Polish government. And the way that Mateusz has just laid that out is something that Poland does not want to go, does not want to embrace unless it absolutely has to. But recently in your conversations with those out at the Munich Security Conference, was there a sense that Warsaw is now on its way to being placed on a war footing?
The Poles are very much not kidding. I have had several conversations, both for interview and off the record, with several senior Polish and defence officials and political officials in the last few years. They're all summed up by one in particular, and it is somebody who listeners would have heard of, but we were just having a conversation, who sort of just simply said Poland is done with being invaded. And that is where it all comes from. But what Tusk is saying is extremely serious, to a degree which I don't think is entirely apprehended among Western publics. It may be among Western governments, but yeah, they're spending 4.7% of GDP this year on defence, which is the highest in NATO. That will rise to 5%. They already have NATO's third largest military after the United States and Turkey. As Matthias was saying, Donald Tusk is talking about a 500,000 strong army when reservists are included. And Korean newspapers reporting over the weekend that in addition to the hundreds of K2 tanks that Poland has already ordered from South Korea, they're going to order an additional 180 worth $6.2 billion. To put that in perspective, that additional 180 K2s, and Poland has many other tanks besides, that's nearly as many main battle tanks as the British Army has, period. The Poles are going to become an extremely serious military force quite quickly.
And in that context, Mateusz, we have a twofold position for Poland, don't we, within Europe? First and foremost, Donald Tusk was talking about being sort of sheltered by the nuclear umbrella of France. So it looks to Europe for help. But when you hear the figures that Andrew has just laid out there is also that role that Poland could play as being one of the leading powers and one of the leading forces in a pan-European defence strategy.
I think a lot of that depends on the political will and the political power of actors in play, not just Prime Minister Tusk, but also Foreign Minister Sikorski, who is a well-respected figure, especially in Europe. But I would add to that there's another challenge that the Polish decision makers are going to face. Very quickly, I think, we need to remember that Poland is by far the most pro-American society in continental Europe. And that explains in part the reason why the current Polish government has restrained from going against or going in different directions than the administration of Donald Trump. We haven't heard any particular criticism, certainly not to the tone of Friedrich Merz or the upcoming German chancellor and German administration, because the Polish decision makers simply cannot afford going against Washington, even in the face of the dispute that emerged over the weekend between Marco Rubio, Elon Musk, and Radosław Sikorski over the funding of the Starlink system in Ukraine. So there are major challenges here for Polish foreign policy, which is all policy right now. We don't really seem to be dealing with anything else at the moment. How to establish a multi-directional foreign policy. On the one hand, not to antagonize the Americans, on the other hand, remain a strong power or have a strong presence inside the European Union, and also perhaps try to forge other forms of alliances with the Baltics and the Nordic countries.
And finally, staying with you, Mateusz, this would be pretty straightforward if you didn't have the Law and Justice Party lurking in the background as well, pushing the narrative in a different direction, threatening to have a much louder voice when it comes to the presidential elections later this year. Donald Tusk and his government are not on the surest of footing, aren't they? So that presents a separate set of problems.
And also explains a lot of things that we've discussed here. We're in the middle of the presidential campaign. Of course, there is a candidate backed by Law and Justice, but there's another one coming from a party even further to the right, Konfederacja, who's riding a wave of enormous anti-Ukrainian sentiments inside some parts of the Polish society. So yes, the situation is very complicated domestically. Luckily, there seems to be a consensus over defense and the fact that we need to spend more, we need to get more people into the armed services, and we need to be prepared. But whether we will be pretending to still be an ally of Donald Trump or having the footing to criticize him publicly, that remains to be seen in May or perhaps even June after the second round of the presidential ballot.
Mateusz Mazzini in Warsaw, Andrew Muller in the studio. Thank you both for joining me on The Briefing. The time is 12:19 here in London. Now, Japan and the United Kingdom have held talks on whether they can work, or where, I should say, they can work closer together and become more resilient in the face of economic threats. Well, to tell us more, I'm joined now by Robert Ward, Japan Chair at the International Institute for Strategic Studies and Director of Geoeconomics. Good afternoon, Robert.
Good afternoon.
So this was a so-called 2+2 meeting held in Tokyo, wasn't it?
That's right. It was the first such meeting for the economy. And it complements the meetings that have already been underway for a while on defence. So there's a defence 2+2, the foreign and defence ministers. But this is an important meeting because, as I say, it's about the economy and there's lots of concerns about economic issues, particularly given what's going on with China, with the US, and of course with Russia.
OK, so let's go through these concerns. China, US and Russia, and the idea that the Japanese and the Brits can forge closer ties. Where do they stand better together?
Well, I think to give you a bit of context, Anglo-Japanese relations are extremely good at the moment, extremely strong. I'd say the strongest since the Anglo-Japanese alliance of the early 20th century. So these relations are really good. Since Brexit, they've evolved from pure economic issues to more strategic issues. And since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, economic issues and security issues have become more closely aligned. So the focus of this 2+2 was around areas such as economic security, energy security, open trade, all the things that matter to both Japan and the UK.
And the threats of China, the United States and Russia, in no particular order, where is it that they could actually pose a threat to Japan and the United Kingdom? And where is it that Japan and the United Kingdom could show a solid and united front to stave off any threats?
Well, areas of cooperation include supply chain security, including around how to align on industrial strategy, on free flow of data, artificial intelligence. All of these really sort of key areas for the economies. For Japan, of course, because it's right next to China, China is the most important thing. So Japan wants the UK to give it some support in how it manages China in the region. That's critical. And so I think because the meeting took place in Japan, the Japanese will have been sort of putting a lot of effort into persuading the UK that despite the security issues in Europe now, and of course they've got more intense because of what's going on between the US and Russia following Donald Trump's second term, Japan will be trying to persuade the UK to keep its interests in the Indo-Pacific.
Much has been made of the way that the world is going and transforming itself into what's been widely described as a transactional place, insofar as everything is decided upon a deal driven at the moment from Washington. One of the things in the brief sent out by the British government was that the Japanese and the British would be building on values. And I wonder whether we are looking at efforts here to revive or indeed preserve values-based relationships.
Well, yes, for values, I think you can also read defence of the rules-based order, which, of course, looks a little bit more frayed now, particularly since Donald Trump's return to the US presidency. So for Japan, the UK, other middle powers, rules are so important because they protect you against predatory bigger powers. So hence the emphasis on rules. And you saw that particularly in the readout of the meeting, for example, with trade. So there's a bit of emphasis in the statement on free and open trade, on the UK's role perhaps within the CPTPP mega trade bloc in the Indo-Pacific, which of course Japan's the largest economy in the bloc by a long way, but the UK rather is the second largest. So it's all about rules. It's all about trying to keep trade open and to try to sort of fly the flag, if you like, in a difficult environment for the rules-based order.
Finally, there was criticism levied that the two nations are too weak to be of use to each other. Where are the grounds for such claims?
Well, there are headwinds. Clearly, in Japan, the government is weak. I think there's probably less merit to that, given the importance of the bureaucrats in driving policy. But nevertheless, there are elections this year and the government's weak. And of course, in the UK, the pressures on the UK to support European security are now intense, again, particularly given the uncertainties around the US's approach to maintaining support for Ukraine. So there are legitimate grounds for highlighting the weakness. But I think in the area of economic security, in the area of values, as you said, the rules-based order. I think Japan and the UK have an important role to play. No, I mean, not least because we keep the middle powers need to keep flying the flag, keep talking about why the rules-based order matters.
Robert Ward, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing. I believe it's time to enjoy a Eurovision update. The host nation, Switzerland, is stepping up the soft power with a set of stamps, and we have a better idea of who's singing what. I'm joined now by Fernando Augusto Pacheco, Monocle's Eurovision correspondent. You must really enjoy it when that little sign on your desk arrives each year.
I love it. And I think it's about two months to go. So I think it's time for an update, Emma.
The sign is out on the desk.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah, he's setting up. The flags come next. OK, bring us up to speed, Faye.
Well, let's talk about Switzerland first. It's a very important country for Switzerland. The first ever Eurovision Song Contest was in the city of Lugano, and actually Switzerland won with Les Asia back in 1956. And I'd like to tell this anecdote. Of course, unfortunately, Les Asia passed away in the last few years, but I met her at a party in 2013. So she was there, and she still kind of loves Eurovision. Anyway.
Well, actually, you mentioned that, but it's just sprung to mind that there was all manner of natter this weekend about the idea of Celine Dion making an appearance. What do we know anything about that, or is that just the internet?
Oh gosh, that's the internet, but I am secretly hoping. I mean, Madonna was at the Eurovision stage at some point. I think it would be a brilliant idea if Celine, and it makes sense, because she last won for Switzerland back in 1988. So I'm really hoping for that. But of course, there's so many exciting things, including the Swiss entry this year, which we actually have a clip for you, Emma. I find it quite a conventional ballad, but it could do well. It's by a Basel-born singer. Her name is Zoe Me, and the song's called Voyage. Let's have a listen.
Tu comprendras un jour que les fleurs sont plus belles quand tu les arroses. Tu m'as coupé tellement de fois.
I've got goosebumps. That surprised me. I wonder whether that's better than we think. It might be bigger than the sum of its parts.
Yes. And the thing is, of course, the video is out, but we need to see the performance live. I think that makes the whole difference. She does have a beautiful voice, I have to say.
Bit of Joni Mitchell in.
The song is a bit earnest. It's about a journey for more compassion, but at the same time, we do need compassion in 2025, don't we?
No, we need saunas. That's what the Finnish said.
Oh yes, we will be talking about saunas in a bit.
That was a big upset, wasn't it?
That was a big upset as well. Shall we talk actually about the other kind of some of the favourites?
But we can't talk about Malta.
No Malta for
now.
No Malta
for
now.
You.
No Malta for now. But one thing before I just want to mention, Switzerland also has a very special stamp for Eurovision. So you can buy for 1 franc and 20 cents. It's a beautiful pop arty kind of mouth in front of the Eurovision trophy. And I think that shows how Switzerland is taking this event seriously.
I love that sort of sense of national pride. And do you know what's really quite nice is that no one will object to the money being spent on that in Switzerland. Everyone will just go, this is a good idea, let's have a stamp. And I love the fact that they have stamps. Given the fact that the Danes are kicking off their lettered service. So well done, Switzerland, for keeping things proper. What else are we talking about, Faye?
Well, let's talk about some of the favourites and some songs that I personally like. Let's start with Sweden. They are indeed the favourites. I was looking at the bookies now. It's Kai with Bara Bada Bastu. The song is in Swedish. It will be their first entry in the Swedish language since 1998. But they're not from Sweden.
No.
They are from Finland.
Yes.
And the song's a homage to Finnish sauna culture. And they do say the word sauna. What is the correct way to pronounce?
I think I need to talk to a Finn.
We need to talk to a Finn. Actually, I've been corresponding with Markus Hippi this morning because he's in shock that Sweden decided to go for this song. I quite like it. I think it's exotic. I think it's a little bit camp. It's not the time for...
It's really not exotic. It's 3 men in a sauna.
A little bit exotic.
And with an accordion.
A little bit exotic. But if you don't mind, let's go for some other contenders.
Yeah.
Austria. I think you might like this one. It's very operatic. JJ, Wasted Love. I think it could be
That doesn't sound like a winner.
Well, if you hear his voice, it could be a winner.
Okay.
There is some Conchita Wurst-esque vibes to that song. I have a personal favorite from Finland, actually. And I'm sorry that I'm talking a lot about Finland, but Erika Wickman with Ich komme, which is in German as well. So there's a lot of it's very multilingual, this year's Eurovision Song Contest. It's a song about pleasure seeking. And it's sexy and it's quite extravagant. And I think, again, it's one of my favorites.
Excellent. What else?
Well, we have France as well, and another trend that I've been noticing this year, that some of the countries, they chose some of their big names. France chose Luan, she's a very well-known pop singer. She had many hits in the French charts. The song is not available yet, but I find it quite interesting that they're really putting the money there. They really want to win. And I think the Netherlands did a similar thing with Claude, with C'est la vie. Claude, again, a very well-established Dutch singer. His song La Da Da, broke the streaming records in the country. So yes, we do have those unknown acts, but also very, very big names representing the countries.
Fernando Augusto Pacheco, we are grateful for that update. Thank you so much for joining us in the studio. And that's all the time we have for today's edition of The Briefing. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to Laura Kramer and Ryuma Takahashi, our producers. Our researcher was Francesca Jilks and our studio manager was Mariella Bevan. The Briefing's back tomorrow at the same time, but for now from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you for listening.